Today's talk is titled Easter Centric, to be delivered by John Loring. The talk covers the following principles. Principle 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. And Principle 4, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. As part-time residents of Cambria, John and Sue Loring have been long-term friends and participants in our Unitarian community. Though professionally, much of John's life was spent in architecture and education, somehow word got out way back he had worked with the National Council of Churches on the United Nations Plaza in New York, as well as with a local church parish in Santa Barbara. John has a doctorate in religious studies from the School of Theology at Claremont, California, a school that was part of the Claremont College complex. Therefore, it seemed appropriate to invite him to speak today on Easter Sunday. He was asked to speak specifically on an Easter-centric topic, and so that is the title that he has chosen for his talk, Easter-centric. I give you John Loring.
First of all, Judy, it's a real honor to be here with you today. Okay. Back in the day, when I was a graduate student at Claremont, one of my professors by the name of Rolf Knierim taught in the area of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. Passionate about his subject, he was recognized as a leading scholar internationally. So let me give you a quick illustration of his work from one of his lectures one morning. He was talking about the second creation story in the book of Genesis. You know, the one where Adam and Eve break one of the rules of life in the garden and they are expelled. Knierim said that the essential point of this story is that nature, the garden, has limits, and that when these limits are violated, nature will strike back. Adam and Eve exceeded the limits, and major problems resulted for them. Knierim went on to say that this is a phenomenon we know all too well today, ecologically. When we violate the limits of life through pollution, climate change, and other things, when we exceed the limits of what the environment allows, nature, the planet, will react, strike back. We see this clearly now, but back in 1971, it was a pretty refreshing way to look at the Genesis story. Now, what was notable about Professor Knierim, with his heavy German accent and his enthusiastic yet sometimes intimidating personality, and with his vast knowledge of Jewish theology and wisdom, recognized worldwide, what was notable was that he had once been a member of the Hitler Youth. During World War II, Knierim, at age 15, had joined the Hitler Youth. And towards the end of the war, as you may know, when things were getting desperate for Germany, the Hitler Youth members were drafted into the army and sent to the front lines to fight. Well, it wasn't long before Knierim and his comrades were captured by the Allies. And while they were in the custody of some Soviet soldiers, They were lined up before a firing squad and about to be executed. An American Army sergeant nearby abruptly intervened, aborted their pending execution, and saved the lives of this small group of teenage boys, Hitler Youth. Knierim found out shortly after that this United States Army sergeant who had saved them was Jewish, a Jew. And at that point in his young life, he decided to dedicate himself to learning about and teaching the history and wisdom that came out of the Jewish biblical tradition. One moment he had been hopelessly at the threshold of death, and in the next moment he had been saved. These moments for him were life-transforming. There are three things to notice about this story. First, Knierim's situation initially seemed hopeless. Second, his salvation, that word carries a little bit too much baggage. Let's say the saving of his life came as a gift. Third, because of this gift, some kind of response was in order, and he was deeply inspired to change. Now, on this Easter Sunday, let's think back to those early followers of Jesus from 2,000 years ago. I would not begin to equate Knierim's experience with that of Jesus' followers in the time of the crucifixion and its aftermath. However, there are some interesting parallels. First, upon the crucifixion itself, all seemed lost to Jesus' followers. The reason for their very existence was about to vanish, not physically, like the teenage Rolf Knierim, but spiritually. Their friend and teacher, their rabbi, was being executed. Like Knierim, all seemed hopeless. In fact, in his gospel, Mark concludes simply with Mary and Mary Magdalene and Salome arriving at the empty tomb, being told they will see Jesus again, and then fleeing, trembling, astonished, and afraid. That was the end of the earliest gospel. Nothing more. But then, shortly thereafter, something happened. It was not as instant as the American Army sergeant stepping in to save Knierim and his friends, but over a short period, something of a life-saving nature was felt. It seems clear that the early followers experienced something profound, something that was so radically life-transforming that the seeds of a whole new religious tradition were planted. So what happened? Anybody know? I sure don't know. But it does seem that something did happen. As Einstein said, the universe is not only more mysterious than we imagine, it is more mysterious than we can imagine. In any event, those early Christians and gospel writers sought to give expression to their experience in the later Gospels in ever more fantastic stories of supernatural events that occurred following Jesus' death. But that's not what I want to talk about. I'd like to take a more natural approach and reflect on a few aspects of what we have already looked at. First, one thing to notice again is that the experience of the early followers, their salvation came as a gift, just as Knirim's did. Before, in each case, all seemed lost. And then unexpectedly, there was the gift of new life. This transformation was not the result of some self-help, do-it-yourself technique, something that might be popular in today's culture. The change came as a gift. The next thing to notice is that a response to the gift was in order. There had to be a move beyond the immediate situation, the status quo, the life as it had been. In Knirim's case, he decided to dedicate himself to the teaching about the Jewish faith, which he did until his untimely accidental death a few years ago at age 90. How the early followers responded to their gift of new life, I keep bumping this thing, sorry. How the early followers responded to their gift of new life is much more complex. And in any case, their responses over the early centuries led to a multifaceted world religion. A variety of paths inspired by Jesus' life and teachings have been taken since. So let's look at a couple of different examples. Some have taken a path more oriented to social justice. Recent examples of people on this path would include those in the social gospel movement emerging in the late 19th century, people like Albert Schweitzer, Mother Teresa, Martin Luther King Jr., the liberation theologians of Latin America, Desmond Tutu, Pope Francis, and many others. Unitarianism, as we know, is very much on this path. Others have chosen to embrace the mystical side of Christianity. Early on, the Coptic Gospel of Thomas gave witness to this, and since then, so many others, from Meister Eckhart to William Blake, Hildegard of Bingen, on down to T.S. Eliot, Thomas Merton, and the former Episcopal priest and Zen student, Alan Watts, and so many others. And of course, there are any number of other paths and combinations of paths. Personally, I like to give attention to those people who have chosen to respond to Christianity through the arts. Think about the sacred music of the great composers, from the times of the medieval Gregorian chants on to Bach, Handel, Mozart, Verdi, on down to Ellington. One work inspiring and evolving into another. Think about art itself, from the early Christian mosaics of a place like Ravenna, Italy, on to Giotto in the Middle Ages, the great artists of the Renaissance, Leonardo, El Greco, and beyond, even down to the surreal worlds of Salvador Dali and Frida Kahlo. Think about architecture, from the incredible Hagia Sophia of 6th century Turkey, the great Gothic cathedrals of Europe, Brunelleschi's magnificent dome in Florence, Michelangelo in St. Peter's, the churches of Sir Christopher Wren in London, awash in divine light, down to the 20th century, with the work of Corbusier at Romcham, and the many churches of Frank Lloyd Wright, including the Unitarian Meeting House in Madison, Wisconsin. One inspiration, one transformation leading to another and another and another. This is a dynamic process. But once again, I've gotten ahead of myself, way beyond the essential point I'd like to make. So let's back up a moment and look back at Knirim and those early followers of Jesus. I think a key point is that after having received the gift of new life, they had to respond. There was no way they could remain in life as it was. New possibilities were opened, and in their free will, they had to choose how to respond. I think this is at the heart of the Easter experience. There is something about the nature of any moment of our lives, our gift of life, out of which we are called to respond. Remaining in the status quo leads to rigor mortis. There is something about the nature of the universe that gives life and urges life on to greater things. And of course, Charles Darwin had a little bit to say about this. In his vivid and powerful words, the Greek novelist Nikos Kazantzakis, who I read, writes of the cry, the breath, which calls us forward. His words are terrifying, perhaps not unlike the experience of Mary and Mary Magdalene and Salome at the empty tomb of Jesus. Other modern thinkers have used other words and ideas. John Dewey talked about choosing to move on to greater ideals of life. The psychologist Abraham Maslow proposed a model for moving through several life stages towards self-actualization. That is, pressure towards fuller and fuller being. Alfred North Whitehead and other process philosophers, along with the proponents of natural theology, explored and speculated about that which calls us to new and richer possibilities of our being. And they agree that the response to the ever-present gift of life involves participating in an ongoing, evolving, dynamic process that can lead to greater richness, heightened consciousness, more sensitive love, and expanded freedom. And for many Christians, the one, the energy, the power inherent in this dynamic process that calls is named God. And as John said in the last of the Gospels, God is love. The divine gift of new life calls for a response. And again, I think this is about as Easter-centric as I can get.